We're here today with Mark Linas, which is famous because he was a prominent anti-GM activist, and now he's on the GM side. So we want to ask you, what made you change your mind?
Well, I was definitely anti-GM activist because I was in the fields destroying the crops back in the 1990s when I was somewhat younger than I am today. But I wouldn't say I'm pro-GM. I'm now pro-science. So I think we have to look at each of these crops and each of these traits on a case-by-case basis and assess them like that, just like you do anything else. There's nothing different about GMOs than there is from any other crops or foods, and that's the key thing for people to understand. That actually the whole GMOs thing actually is a kind of a fake category. There's no scientific basis to considering what people think of as GMOs differently from any other kind of crop breeding.
Was your, let's call it conversion, a long process, or there was a moment where you said, "Ah, I was wrong"?
Well, there was a moment, but it was as part of a longer process, right? I stopped doing anti-GMO activism in about the year 2000. Then I went off to work on climate change, and I wrote books on climate change, which I wanted to be very heavily scientific. So I had hundreds of peer-reviewed references in the back of the books, and I wanted to be able to accurately represent the perspective of the scientific community. And yet at the same time, I was still in an anti-scientific mindset with regards to um, GMOs, and so I didn't ended up not wanting to be pro-science and to defend the scientific consensus on climate change, and then be anti-science and deny the scientific consensus on GMO safety. And so in the end, I had to change my mind. But the specific moment was when I wrote an anti-GMO, the final anti-GMO piece in the newspaper in The Guardian I wrote in 2008. And I realized when I was doing that I had no actual scientific source material. It was all coming from campaign groups and other antis. And then at the end, all the comments were like, "This guy doesn't know what he's talking about," and I just realized this is true, and I just won a scientific prize from the Royal Society for my climate change book, and I just realized I wasn't holding myself to the same standards of science when I was writing about GMO stuff. So first of all, I decided to say nothing and to really just to get into it, to get much better informed. And then later on, I came out in public and said, "Look, I got this wrong."
What was the reaction you got from your peers?
Um, it was slightly negative. I'm sort of understating the case. I mean, there was even a petition, I think, from former colleagues denouncing my um, situation and saying I'd lied about various things. So it was quite hostile, but to be honest, you would expect it because the GMO thing, anti-GMO thing, has been really a part of people's. Like I've said, it's in the DNA of the Green movement, and I've been an environmentalist and a Green campaigner for a long time. And so people were very threatened by me coming out. And there's nothing more threatening than a former colleague coming out and saying that you've got something wrong. So I expected that reception, and that, to be honest, in the years since then, I mean, I really spoke about it publicly in 2013 in January. Things have calmed down. I can actually have sensible conversations with people who are still, I would say, on the anti side, but we actually find we still have a certain amount in common.
So do you think that currently the green movement is might be causing a negative environmental impact with this opposition to GM?
Well, Stuart Brand has a good quote on this where he says, "I think that the environmental movement's probably done more harm with its opposition to GMOs than anything else it's got wrong,"
Even nuclear?
like nuclear being another example. But actually, the environmental movement's got a lot right, um, you know, in terms of improving uh, or decreasing the pollution of our air and water, increasing the health of the reduction of pesticides, chemical use in farming in general. All of those things are good things. Addressing climate change, addressing biodiversity loss. So let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater and imagine that the environmental movement is our enemy in the pro-science uh, debate. For me, I want to see the environmental movement really more aligned with us because, from a pro-science perspective, if you can have the evidence, then you know how to solve problems. There's no point in just chasing after myths and misinformation and things. You'll end up harming the environment. So it's important for the environmental movement more than anyone to be science-based.
And our last question, since you're an environmentalist, you obviously care very much about the environment, our planet, about all this. The regulation process for new GM traits, what will it look like? How will it be different from what people do these days?
Um, the whole GMO regulatory system is completely stupid and pointless. there is no need for any regulation on GMOs, which doesn't apply to other forms of crop breeding. I mean, as you'll know, mutagenesis has been around for decades, and it's just been kind of grandfathered in, even though on a kind of logical sense, there'll be much more unintended consequences potentially than there is with the very precise genetic transfers that you have with a classic transgenic approach. And also now with new breeding technologies like CRISPR and things like that, where you have much more, even more precision in how the genome is modified, there's even less reason to have that separately targeted by any kind of regulation, because it's less risky by nature of what's going on, by the nature of the science. So I think, I mean, in an ideal world, we could throw out the regulation and start again and consider not the process, but the trait. You know, you can assess that if there's a new proteins produced or anything like that, then yes, you've got a case. But at the moment, it's ridiculous to single out GM crops, which every single country does, and it simply holds back scientific progress.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Welcome.